Thank you, Claire, and thank you all for coming. It is a great honour for me to be here with Claire and a highlight for my visit here to America, because I've admired Claire's writing for many years. In answer to your question, what is my claim on Africa? To paraphrase your president, Africa had a claim on me in Chicago some years ago when I was introduced as one of Africa's leading novelists. A writer survives, I always think, to the extent to which he's misunderstood, which makes this such a marvellous country to visit. And I think they confused Tanzania and Tasmania, an embarrassment of consonants and continents, I guess. So I've learnt not to disagree with the wonderfully euphoric sort of descriptions you're given here, and thus I read to them about my Africa, and there it was. And the readers and the several homeless of Chicago who gathered that evening in the way of that wonderful Catholic and welcoming spirit of American book readings took that home, I think, as their own version of that continent. I am going to read because in my country you don't read for very long, because we have these things in hotels and the audience inclines to a certain violence very quickly, and so I read only for a short time. Otherwise it is, as Dostoevsky observed, no longer literature but corrective punishment. This is I did a gig in Germany once where I had a man who'd been described as he was a voiceover man, because they'd still dubbed their movies there, and he was the German voice of Brad Pitt. And any Brad Pitt movie, he was the voice. And I got to the reading, and he was about 4 foot wide and even shorter, and he had these two little toad-like eyes that peered over the table. He read for 90 minutes, and that was just the first reading, and then they foolishly threw back to him, all in German. I didn't understand any of it, just had to fight the whites of my eyes going backward. At the end of the second reading, even the Germans, who had shown remarkable stoicism and that sort of spirit of Stalingrad, that had enough, and they gave him a standing ovation, and I very falsely also applauded him and thanked him enormously and asked him the only thing I could ask, but had he read that for that interminable period in the voice of Brad Pitt? And he said no. He said, I taught for you a little bit more Kiefer Sutherland. Anyway, this is at the centre of this book, for those of you who haven't read it, there's a man is murdered, but his tragedy begins at the beginning of the day when he folds his blanket the opposite way to Japanese army regulations. And this short reading happens many years later. Decades later, Jimmy Bigelow would insist that his kids always fold their clothes so, fold ever outwards. He would open the drawers of the chest of drawers in their suburban weatherboard home in Hobart to make sure they were safe and the fold was out. He would never hit or smack them for not folding their clothes with the fold out. He would beg and plead. He would order and demand, and in the end, exasperated, he would refold and restack their clothes himself as they stood by, nervously waiting. He would feel some nameless terror that was beyond him to explain. A confusion they too would carry with them for the rest of their lives, that was both love and fear, that was beyond the drawers opening and closing, beyond their father's frustration and mumbling. He knew they didn't understand. But could they not see? How could they not know? It should have been so obvious what had to be understood. You could never know when everything might change. A mood, a decision, a blanket, a life. They knew none of it. They only knew that whatever they did, he would never hurt them. At the very worst, he would throw them over his knee, bring his hand up and then hold it there, hovering over their bottom. Sometimes they would feel him shaking through his knees and thighs. They would steal a look upwards and see his hand trembling, his eyes watery. How could they know that their father was desperately trying to protect them from the unexpected smash of a rifle butt into their soft child's cheeks, to warn them of what horrors this hard world had ready for the unwary, the unwise and the unprepared, to prepare them for all those things for which no one could ever be ready? They knew only this one thing, that he would never hurt them. As his body trembled back and forth through time, they knew what he meant when he said, "Rightio," and suddenly threw them off his lap and back onto their feet. Averting his eyes, he would wave them away with an extended hand. "That's it, rightio," he would say. Just put the fold out next time. Out, he would say, always out. Rightio." They would run outside into the sun. Perhaps, he wondered, he didn't make the time or space he should for love. He fitted it in, and it flitted away. Perhaps he somehow chose why he couldn't say the predictable lines of work over love's wild circling, the folding of a blanket over the unfolding of locked arms. But sometimes it was just there, staring out an open window to see little Jodie look up and wave to him with the biggest smile. He was shocked to see love playing in a backyard of brown grass under a sprinkler's diamond spill. Shocked to know he'd been lucky enough to live and know it, to love and be loved. And he would watch his children playing outside in the sun, ashamed, amazed, for it was always sunny. This next piece I'll read, shorter, is simply about what happened to the death railway itself, which I came to see was really perhaps one of the most important characters in the novel. With the dream of a global Japanese empire lost to radioactive dust, the railway no longer had either purpose or support. The Japanese engineers and guards whose responsibility it was were imprisoned or repatriated. The slaves that had remained to maintain the line were freed. Within weeks of the end of the war, the line began welcoming its own end. It was abandoned by the Thais, it was dismantled by the English, it was pulled up and sold off by tribespeople. After a further time, the line began to bend and warp. Its banks broke, its embankments and bridges washed away, and its cuttings filled in. Abandonment ceded to metamorphosis. Where once death stalked, life returned. The line welcomed rain and sun. Seeds germinated in mass graves between skulls and femurs and broken pick handles. Tendrils rose up alongside dog spikes and clavicles thrust around teak sleepers and tibias, scapulas, vertebrae, fibulas and femurs. The line welcome weeds into the embankments the slaves had carried as dirt and rock in their tankers. It welcomed termites into the fallen bridge timbers the slaves had cut and carried and raised. It welcomed rust over the railway irons the slaves had shouldered in long rows. It welcomed rot and ruin. In the end, all that was left was the heat and the clouds of rain and insects and birds and animals and vegetation that neither knew nor cared. Humans are only one of many things, and all these things long to live, and the highest form of living is freedom. A man to be a man, a cloud to be a cloud, bamboo to be bamboo. Decades would pass. A few short sections would be cleared by those who thought memory mattered, transformed in time into strangely resurrected trunkless legs, tourist sites, national sites, sacred sites. For the line was broken, as all lines finally are. It was all for nothing, and of it, nothing remained. People kept on longing for meaning and hope, but the annals of the past are a muddy story of chaos only. And of that colossal ruin, boundless and buried, the lone and level jungle stretched far away. Of imperial dreams and dead men, all that remained was long grass. Thank you.